moving to the interior of the United States. My family chose to move to Colorado. My father had a distant cousin farming in the Brighton area who agreed to sponsor our family. So in early 1942, Mom, Pop, both 31 years old, my sister Lynn, 7 years, my brother Bruce, 3 years old, and Mary, 2 years old, and me on the way boarded a train to Colorado. We sharecropped on a small farm in Welby, Colorado, near the South Platte River. Life was tough for us, living without running water, electricity, or indoor plumbing. In Colorado, the family didn't experience too much prejudice. We lived. Finally, after having our crops destroyed by hail frequently, we decided to move to Worland to farm with Mr. Takeda. In Worland, I did not feel any prejudice. I remember being welcomed to the 4th grade by Grant Yuzufusha and other classmates. My siblings did not feel any prejudice either. I'd like to thank the Worland community for being kind and supportive. We were particularly grateful for the support we received by the patrons, by visiting our vegetable stand in town.
I had a question of the group. You know, like Tom, you know, he grew up Worland, Tenslake, I grew up in Tenslake. When did you first learn about this camp?
Probably after college, I mean, when I was in Colorado. In fact, all the camps, because there I met people that were incarcerated in Arizona. And actually, my sister-in-law was born in camp in Arizona, one of the camps.
But what about the rest of you?
I had heard there was a camp here when I was living in Worland as a child, but just sort of heard that in passing. I didn't know the name of it. I didn't know necessarily who was there, but I had heard that there were Japanese that had been moved from the coast to the interior near here. That's all.
And I didn't know until I was an adult living in Denver too, like Tom. And I happened to take a class, and I said, how could this be? We live so close and knew nothing about it.
Yeah, see, I mean, Tom, just like you, the rest of us were oblivious. And our parents probably did protect us because it was a bad thing. And it didn't matter what your color. It was a bad thing. I mean, I was just curious. So, Lyle, do you remember?
I don't remember growing up. Of course, I started school in '44, and they just started in '42. There was no, the Japanese families around Worland nothing. I mean, they went to school with us, and there wasn't any prejudice against, I mean, growing up as a kid, there was the Fujikawas family and the Ondo family, and Fujikawa, but that was later.
I don't remember hearing anything about
But those kids, see, Eddie Fujikawa was the same age as I was, but he had his oldest brother was the same age as one of my brothers, and they just normal life. I mean, there wasn't any disruption that I know of in any of those families going to school.
Of the war on me, other than what I've heard other people talk about. Both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, were farming in Colorado already, so there was no impact like people in California and along the West Coast who had to move inland. They were not forced off of their property or anything like that.
However, they were evidently being monitored, or they felt they were monitored, so they would give up their cameras or their guns or anything Japanese to their Caucasian friends for safekeeping until they could return. And there's another interesting story. My paternal grandfather was evidently into Japanese kendo, which is a sword fencing type thing, and he just buried his stuff in the ground. So there's possibly a farm in Fort Lupton someplace that has this stuff still hidden in the ground, because I have no idea what happened to that. Let's see. Other stories I've heard about people who actually lived on the coast. As the movie mentioned, some of them were penniless after they left, but one of the people who came in here was my friend's Auntie Sue. And Auntie Sue said, fine, we get free room and board. However, then she was asked to teach elementary school there. So she, without any credentials, teaching credentials, she taught elementary school. Let's see. My parents were married during the war, and I asked one time, well, when we were getting married, I said, well, how many people did you have? She said, well, very few, because evidently there was a law or rule declared that only a certain number of people could congregate at any single time. So their wedding was very small. I think they were married in December of 1942. And lastly, Ms. Carr, who was my high school social studies teacher, asked me to write an essay on this situation. And I said, no, my parents or my family wasn't directly involved. And I didn't realize that, I was still descended from this, so I would still be indirectly involved. And I refused to do it. So let's see, and also I just was thinking last night, they talk about the people who were impacted by the war. I have many uncles. Both my father and my mother came from very large families, so there were a lot of males who were recruited into the war. And let's see, at least all the males, except the eldest son, who was required to help on the farm, served in the military at various points in time. But the biggest impact were the two uncles from either side, one from my mother's side and one from my father's side, were recruited during their high school years, which meant that when they were finished with their term in the military, they went back to their homes, right? And one would expect them to go back into their high schools, which they did not do. And of course, this impacted the entire life of that person. And unfortunately, it impacted not only that person, but the person they married, and the children of their families. And unfortunately, I can tell you that both these families have no living descendants. They had children, but their children are already deceased, and here we are, we're fine, because our parents were not directly impacted. So this war business is really not good. It impacts not only the generation who served, but the descending generations.
I was pretty well sheltered from this. I didn't even know about Hot Mountain until I started working in Denver. In fact, one of my customers or friends was actually interned here, and that's how I knew. But my parents pretty well sheltered us from the prejudice and from being, I guess, harmed. But I did also have two uncles that served in the military. In fact, one was killed in Italy.